Good afternoon, everybody. This is going to be a forum of three candidates, and I will do a little introduction right here. There are six candidates running for the Vermont U.S. senatorial position. All six candidates have been offered an opportunity to participate in 5 different forums. Forum participation is being offered via Zoom as well as various locations within Vermont. To date, only 4 of the candidates responded to participate in any of these forums. Bernie Sanders and Gerald Malloy have not made any effort to reply to these invitations. The questions posed in this forum are similar to those questions posed in the Malloy-Sanders debate given a couple of days ago. This way, voters will have an opportunity to compare responses. Okay, the rules. First of all, before we go any further, I would like to say welcome Mark, Stewart, Matt Hill, and hopefully Steve Berry will be showing up very shortly. The forum rules are very simple. Each question asked will be allowed 2 minutes response time by each candidate. A 10-second warning will be held up when the candidate has talked for 1 minute, 50 seconds. Possibly I'll do a 30-second warning too. Probably we'll do a 30-second warning too. The sign will be in the moderator's window on your screen. It's just a little note saying 10 seconds and 30 seconds. Each candidate will be expected to conclude their response in the next few seconds after they see the 10-second time notification come up. The question part of this forum is going to be targeted for an hour. At the conclusion of asking questions, each candidate will be allowed an additional 2 minutes to say whatever they would like for a closing. Then I will conclude with a brief comment and a thank you to all the candidates, and that will close down the forum. So we're going to start with Mark Stewart with the first question. And all candidates have been provided these questions beforehand, so they had equal opportunity to review them over and sort of prepare in a way. So there's no favoritism shown here whatsoever. Economics. That was the first question on the Bernie Sanders Malloy debate or interview. And the question goes, inflation, taxation have gone through the roof. It is getting very hard for Vermont citizens to make ends meet. I'd like to have a comment. Mark, would you start first, please?
I'll start with the taxation part. The taxation is fully within the government's control. And that means it's almost fully within your control. Okay. We are who the government ends up pushing. If you don't want to see Vermont dumped down even more with taxes that are almost insurmountable for some people, and you can recognize that what privately done charities are a perfect replacement for everything that the federal government does with welfare, almost everything that the state does with welfare, and instead let local governments that you have better control of, let private charities, and let you, your family as individuals, take care of needs, wants, you do it far better. So the taxation is a huge problem, because when 40% of your income is being stripped away, inflation, even if it's 2%, is very, very hurtful. I am the candidate who would like to see the federal government reduced to the 2 and only 2 elements that it really has any business doing. And that is defense, including courts, and justice, including policing. Not much policing at the federal level. Generally, it is low level at the federal, and policing is meant to be local. That takes care of a lot of the economics.
Very good, Mark. You had 30 seconds to go. Matt, would you like to take your turn, please?
Sure. I actually don't have a lot to say on this comment because I'm a believer in the free market system, and you need to have jobs hopefully we can get better paying jobs, but it's more of a self-funded thing. I believe in a little lower taxes at the federal level and state level for that matter. You can't fight inflation unless you do certain things, and the current administration has driven up inflation because of the choices that have been made. I don't believe in giving out a lot of extra money because that just actually stokes inflation when people have more. Being a CPA and a financial planner, the only thing I could suggest is possibly taking in a renter, which will help with the lack of housing, and or sharing with relatives, or taking on extra work. Those are about my only suggestions with this subject. So I'm gonna leave it at that.
Can I chime in for 30 seconds?
Sure.
Matt's right. It's the inflation of the recent 4 years has been caused by government access. Okay, I'm sure he's referring at minimum to cutting oil production, which ends up increasing the cost of food, everything being transported. The government is behind a lot of this. And thus, when you restrict government from doing so many things, you end up driving down the price and helping affordability.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to point something out that I think will work for this forum, and that is if you answer the questions in less than your 2 minutes, you're going to have a 2-minute summary or whatever you'd like to say at the end of the question part of this forum. We can extend that a minute or two for each candidate if we have the time. That's not a problem. So take notes on questions you might want to say more about during this forum. Okay, Mark, you're up next. And this is question 2, and it's related to economics also. Do you have any ideas on bringing more and better jobs to Vermont?
You said Mark, but did you mean for Matt to go first?
No, I meant you.
I'll go.
I meant you.
The economic idea that Vermonters need to recognize, I think we already do. We are a small state that can't compete with big metropolises. Okay, we're destined to lose some young, talented people to New York, Boston, LA, Chicago, DC. But it's exacerbated when the federal government goes and aids the biggest corporations. And that's been inherent for the last 3.5 years. Biden has tied government to big pharma. Biden has tied government to big tech. Biden has tied government to big engineering and even big agriculture. Vermont has medium-sized agriculture. We don't get a big enough benefit. We get some. But compared to bigger states, we get lost. And so when the best jobs now are going somewhere else, no wonder a lot of our talented Vermont-born youth are going somewhere else. We do have a near desperate labor problem, and keeping Vermonters here could be the responsibility somewhat of the federal government. I just ask them to butt out so that we can have a more robust economy.
Thank you, Mark. Matt, would you like to respond to the question? I'll reread it for you. It's related to economics also. Do you have any ideas on bringing more and better jobs to Vermont?
A little bit. I would, if I get elected, I would absolutely work to bring some federal jobs to Vermont. Now, I've been told by a higher office Vermont candidate last year when I met with him. He said, when I proposed this thought, he said, well, Vermonters don't like the federal government being in their business. They do not like the federal government whatsoever, and I think that's a problem. because the federal government is a very good employer. You get realistic wages. You are able to pay taxes at a higher rate. Um, we have what is economics has what's called a multiplier effect. They think that if you have one person making 100,000, that actually has a 7 times benefit to the economy, in that with all the extra income or all the income that is sprinkled around to the rest of the state, that 100,000 becomes $700,000 worth of spending around the state. So that's one thing I think would be good. Vermont doesn't have a large business community. It's an absolutely gorgeous state, and so it's almost more of a scenic getaway as opposed to a place to work. And but what I think would be helpful is if the supermajority would reduce the rules to the construction industry and allow uh, the industry to then create jobs, and the state will also get more housing for the people that are here. So you'll remove two crises at the same time.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, nice response. Still
Well,
related
can
to
I comment? I believe I have extra time. Can I comment?
Go ahead.
Matt, it's the second time in 24 hours that I've heard this, to me, very objectionable statement, that with more jobs here, people can pay taxes at a higher rate. We don't want to pay taxes at even the same rate. They are too high. They have to be lowered greatly at the federal, state, and I believe local levels. Bringing federal jobs is a nice idea, but I'd like people to envision that federal jobs should be minimal across the board. If you add some federal jobs here, it's nice for a few people, but if they're added here, they're added 30-fold somewhere else. Vermont is a net loser compared to every other, not every other state, but most other states. We pay more to the feds than we get back.
Thank you, Mark. It is your turn now for the next question, Mark. Related questions to economics. Healthcare cost. And here's the question. Do you have any thoughts on reducing healthcare cost?
If this is for me again, I'll go.
Yes, Mark. I'm tracking who's who. Yes, this is for you.
Okay, so healthcare costs are greatly reduced by the free market. The free market provides, in almost every realm where it's allowed to operate, lower prices, lower costs because of competition. It's what gets us in furniture stores. So many varieties of leather, wood, plastic, teak. It gets us so many varieties of prices. Varieties of prices are very good. People who have the money to afford the teak and mahogany can do that. And guess what signals whether people can afford it? Once again, the free market. Guess what signals whether we should produce some of those mahogany furniture, or no, we better go with just slim back and Walmart style, and that's all we can do. The free market. It is a signaler. If you lose the free market, especially in healthcare, where it may be more needed than anywhere else, you put lives in jeopardy. Bernie Sanders and many Democrats believe that in healthcare, you have to put a cap on the price of prescription drugs. No, let the free market do it. And with it, prescription drug prices can't stay high that long, because once again, the signal becomes, hey, this type of medicine is very good. It's very profitable for one company, and a few more companies then start getting in. Then the competition allows everyone to have a lower cost alternative. Patents keep one company protected for a little while, but they allow other companies to work around the patent somewhat. So you're not getting Viagra, but you're getting something close. And you end up having, once again, consumer choice, which is beautiful, especially in healthcare.
Thank you, Mark. Matt, same question. I'll read it over again. You have any thoughts on reducing healthcare care?
Yes, I do. One of the things would be to reduce the patent length time of those drugs. Currently, I believe they're 17 years, and in the recent history, companies have been allowed to repatent their same drugs. I believe in reducing that and not allowing the external patent, and that alone will bring down the price of drugs. As far as other healthcare, I believe in some type of universal healthcare because I think it's good for society, and but I will let the experts determine that. I will be bringing a health and pharmacy actuary on my team with me to Washington. That actuary, there are only about 13,000 actuaries in the country. It's very, very hard to get by the test, and a lot of people fail out at a lot of the time. But I am bringing one that has worked for one of the largest insurance companies for 20 years and has a lot of experience, and I will defer to that individual for my answer once I'm elected. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. All right, we have one last question that is sort of economic related. And all these questions were sort of matching up with the Bernie Sanders and Gerald Malloy debate they had a few days ago. The last question related to economics is housing costs have increased significantly. Do you have any ideas on how you would make housing more affordable to Vermonters? Mark, it's your turn. Mark.
Housing costs are not a federal issue, or they shouldn't be. At the local level, there's a lot that can be done. So I'm an advocate for ADUs. Associated dwelling units are permitted in some urban places now, and they're a good idea. I think they should be permitted in almost every town. Let the towns decide. But right now, where they're not permitted, it means you have 2 acres of land and only one structure is allowed on it. If you wanted to build a second structure for grandma on the same property, she can easily walk, maybe you even cover it. It's not allowed unless there's an ADU. Maybe a young, just out of college kid, not ready to spend a lot of money on a property of his own, whether it's renting or owning, but can be semi-independent of mom and dad by being just around the corner in the same 2-parcel unit. That would dramatically allow more housing that is affordable. Now, there's another element of local building. And localities, some of them are extremely strict on the construction, which drives up the costs. It doesn't really produce that much better homes. It produces a lot of revenue for consultants and lawyers and environmental engineers. But if you had still safe and still inspectable new housing, it could come at a much lower cost. Finally, I do think people who are expecting something from the federal government should be willing to take a little less for now. So if there is a housing voucher, maybe it's not for a plush 3 bedrooms for 3 people home, but instead it's for something that is more Spartan. 2 bedrooms, only 1 bath. You can get by for a while anyway and live a little more economically yourself.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
My turn.
Matt, your turn. Yes, it is.
Terrific. I agree with most of Mark's points. They're very good. Um, if you can't afford, not everybody can afford a 5-bedroom house. Some, in the 1900s, we had 2 and 3 bedroom houses, sometimes with 1 bathroom, and people somehow got by without those. Yes, it's not as convenient as the 5-bedroom, 3-bath home, but when you're starting out, that's what you need, or a condo. I started out in a condo, lived there for a few years, and decided to sell it. Unfortunately, we picked the wrong time to buy it. I think my wife bought it 5 minutes after the peak. So within uh, less than a year, it did a stock split, but not it did a home split, but not the kind you like, because the value of it went down by 50%. So we didn't get any equity. We had negative equity when we moved, but we decided to keep it, rent it, and waited for the market to come back. And that's what you do when you have issues. And yes, I so much believe that housing costs can be lower if the supermajority makes laws that really don't need to be on the books. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. All right, we're going to move on to an entirely different type of question. We answered the economic related to healthcare, housing, and jobs. This question is going to be 2 parts, and the question is going to have to do with climate. So part 1, there are 2 big topics being discussed by both citizenry and the government regarding climate change. One is greenhouse gas emissions, and the other is the spraying. It's a spraying or turning the skies into hazy and cloudy days. I'm sure we've all seen that, when they were perfectly clear before the planes left the trails in the sky. Okay, so that's the 2 items in this question. The first part of the question is going to be, do you take a position on restricting or limiting fossil fuels through the purchase of carbon credits or other governmental regulation action? Mark, your turn.
Yes. The position is by granting a right, a property right to every American in the air we breathe and the water that we drink or use to grow food. This has not been recognized well enough anywhere. So it would be on the revolutionary side. And I recognize that becomes very hard to enforce. Even if you make those property rights granted, it's very hard even now for an individual to bring suit against big Monsanto for polluting their streams. It's very hard to bring suit against McDonnell Douglas for overly polluting the airspace. So that's why an environmental protection agency has merit. It's one of the few things in the federal government that I wouldn't mind seeing expanded. It might be the only thing. But the Constitution does not yet permit it. I'm sorry, but in 1789 and since, our framers have not sought to use the federal government to involve Congress or the presidency in environmental protection. And I respect the Constitution so much, and we should. It's a constraint on government in so many good ways. It deserves an amendment so that this might be an area where Congress is allowed to act. Until then, don't. And the EPA right now has gone wayward with what power it doesn't really have in the first place. It has used it to abuse landowners, to restrict development, to restrict businesses that may be very clean. Carbon credits are a decent idea, that if you're granted a certain amount of polluting space and you underuse it, maybe somebody who needs it more could overuse it. That is a responsible and almost completely private set of trade-offs. Let's get into that realm first.
Thank you, Mark. Matt, would you like to respond to the question? I'll reread it for you.
Sure.
Do you take a position on restrictions or limitations of fossil fuels through the purchase of carbon credits or governmental regulatory actions?
I'm not a big fan of the fossil credits, because the whole world isn't adapting to that or is bound by that. There are several countries out there, several countries out there that pollute the world no matter what. So I don't believe that we should be the ones subject to it if the majority or a percentage of the world isn't going to be subject to it. It's a disadvantage. It's a big financial disadvantage, which I'm very against. If everybody would agree to it, then possibly. As far as making the sky a different color, so not as much sun comes down. I'm no expert in that, but every time we've tried to tame nature before, it hasn't worked. So I'm doubting this will either, but if it shows promise, then possibly. But I think many states uh, or have a positive flow of carbon inflow to their trees. Like Vermont has a ton of trees. We don't make nearly the pollution that many states do because we have no industry. I think Vermont is very much within its rights to pollute more if we wanted to, but I think we're a very clean state. It's so nice to breathe when I'm here, especially when I'm walking among the 250 pine trees that my dad planted 20 years ago that I've just cleaned up all the needles from. But that's all I have to say as far as that right
Thank
now.
you, Matt. Matt, you partly answered the next question, so but I have to give Mark a chance to go for it. It's also on climate change. And there are communities in the country that have proposed laws and restrictions against generating these artificial trails and hazy clouds. And the question is, do you believe the haze and the trails put in our skies by airplanes is related in any way to climate change and something referred to as the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about?
If it's related to climate change, it's minor. Please recognize, everyone, that all the emissions that the Western world puts out in a 5-year period, so that's a lot, is overwhelmed by a single large volcanic eruption. Iceland had volcanoes in 2011, 2012. And literally what they spewed into the atmosphere had more clouding and more thus deleterious effect than 5 years worth of Western civilization. I don't want to impede Western Civ when it's making perhaps a minor contribution to global warming. I say perhaps because we don't know that, and there's been evidence that we have had no global warming if you look at certain parts of the globe. Even if you have, we have the ability to adapt, okay? People who move from Texas to Vermont, I just met a couple. They adapt by 35 degrees in a month. They're all set. So if it takes 100 years for a 2 or 3 degree adaptation that maybe we have to overdo or endure, it's not even endurance, because in those 100 years, we're going to create, that's what technology does, wonderful things for refrigeration, wonderful things for clothing, wonderful things using often petroleum products. And for gosh sakes, the world needs more petroleum. Indonesia needs to be developing more, not less. Africa needs to be using more vehicles, not fewer. If you take just a few elite people that seem to want to govern the world, they leave 90% of the globe, the poorer 90%, on the outs.
Thank you, Mark. Matt, you really have answered part of the second question. Would you like more time, or would you like me to read the second question again?
Yeah, it'd be great if you could read it again.
Certainly, certainly. Climate change part 2. There are communities in the country that have proposed laws and restrictions against generating these artificial trails and haze of clouds. Do you believe that the haze and the trails, the clouds, put in our skies by airplanes is related in any way to climate change and sometimes referred to as the elephant in the room nobody wants to talk about?
I'm more on Mark's opinion in that the volcanoes from around the world spew all kinds of pollutants. And if you look back a couple of years ago, when a good portion of Canada burned, it smelled like a campfire in Maine and let out a ton of carbon. I think those are more indicative of what the world does and nature does. You know, trees burn. Back in the 70s, we had laws saying, or rules saying, don't start forest fires. There was a leader in the interior back then who, if a forest fire started at 8 p.m., they wanted it out at 8 a.m. We can't tame nature. Nature will beat us every time. So I don't know what the answer is, but there are scientists that are coming much closer than I would, and I would lean to what they have to say. But I don't think we need to do anything more drastic that is going to cost us way more than the benefit that we will receive from it.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, a new topic. FEMA and disaster response. There have been 2 recent hurricanes that have had excessive damage in communities in Florida and North Carolina and they've made the news. National news has publicized the damage done in both those states. There's been a lot of complaints about FEMA's response to these catastrophic situations. There were complaints about FEMA's response in the previous Vermont hurricanes and floods that we've had. So the question here is, what would you do to improve FEMA's Vermont response to these types of disasters? Mark, your turn.
As you can probably predict, I would abolish FEMA. It's a federal agency that can't do nearly as well as localities can do. Vermont has enough ingenuity, enough technology, and enough volunteerism that if disasters happen here, it's not going to need a federal, which would be a slow, inept, probably, response. If a dam bursts in Vermont, you're going to have volunteers. I'll be one of them. I'm up in the Burlington area. There'll be some people in Rutland. We will be able to get people housed, get things out of harm's way, rebuild things faster and better than if directed or misdirected by a federal agency. Our money is going largely to waste in most federal programs. At best, all we get back is an equal effort with some slicing of money that stays with the government and it's bureaucratic. But it's not going to be at best, because why does a bureaucrat in Annandale, Virginia, employed by FEMA, care as much about residents of Shelburne, Fairhaven, Virgin on Champlain side? They don't. They can't. Don't empower them to do that. And this is the problem with Democrats. Elected Democrats now feel that, oh, we have expertise that the masses don't have, and it's clustered around PhD holders, largely in DC. That deference is so misplaced. Education has become too highly valued. Practical experience does. I went to a high-end school, but I learned nothing at Dartmouth that would help people in a disaster. Meanwhile, there are people day and night who work trucks and work construction who know how to help in a disaster. Empower them, not the PhDs in DC.
Thank you, Mark. Matt, I'll reread the question for you. What would you do to improve FEMA's response, Vermont response specifically, to these types of disasters?
Well, I come from Burke, which is next to Lyndonville, which is about 20 miles north of St. Jay. Within a month, we had a 100-year flood. And then a month later, which the 100-year flood was exactly 1 year to the day after the last 100-year flood. A month later, there was the 1,000-year flood. I was near there and was a little fearful of going out because it was a mess. Fortunately, I live relatively at a high altitude, so Noah's Ark would have to come pick me up if I was flooded out. But there were roads washed away, bridges washed away, and we've heard I've heard many times that FEMA's response was too slow. Now, when the waters cleared, I went down and helped out one of the local sandwich shops that had flooding, and the water came up 4 feet because I walked in there and they said, "We're closed, sir." And I said, "Well, I'm not here for anything, but I'm here to help you get the stuff out of your store so mold doesn't come." And I was immediately welcomed in and gave them a hand for a few hours. They say that FEMA's money is too slow, and I answered a question a month ago that it's good that FEMA researches the cause and the amount of damage because we don't want money flowing out so quickly if people are trying to scam the system. Now we hear that there's no money at FEMA because the government has taken it to work with the migrants. I'm very against that. So there's no money because the current administration kind of stole it from Vermonters and from North Carolina people. I do like FEMA involved mainly because of the Army Corps of Engineers. We get expertise that we don't have here.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. The next question or topic is actually covering, it's going to be covered by 2 questions, and it's on health freedom. There's been a lot of controversy over the subject of abortion. So you probably know what the question is. Do you support federal and state regulatory actions for or against abortion? Mark, please.
Mr. Kemp, abortion is not health. The freedom that some people feel a woman might have to kill an in utero human is not a freedom for that human, and it's a absolutely misused if used in the name of freedom. It's in the name of selfishness. Now, might it be a overridingly, amazingly needed, and thus maybe not that selfish to terminate the life of a tyke? I literally can't think of a circumstance, but it is a doctor who knows the circumstances, and every doctor knows that it is terminating a human that can feel, and a tiny human that you wouldn't want to have that same thing done to you because it's severing your neck or asphyxiating you. In the mode of do unto others, or really it's do not do unto others what you would not want to have done to you. That's what everyone should be thinking for the first time about. Now, the word thinking is important because this is why I would not criminalize an abortion that a woman chooses. Okay, I would not be criminalizing it. I don't think people have the mens rea, that means the thought and knowledge, after being brainwashed for 2 generations about, oh, this is just a cyst. It doesn't feel pain at all. Oh, this is something that's disposable. It's not a higher form of life. There's no differentiator. There's no differentiation between, or no meaningful differentiation between 5 months in utero and 10 months. Well, 10 months includes a month beyond birth. You want to asphyxiate that newborn too? A few Democrats, not Bernie, but a few of them, and unfortunately, Bernie doesn't seem to object. Ralph Northam, governor of Virginia, was one of them, who do not object to accidental live births when the mother had wanted it to be aborted. They would kill that child. We can't have this.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Matt, I'm going to just read that to make sure you are on track.
I'm okay with that unless you want to.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Do you support federal and state regulatory actions for or against abortion?
I actually have conflicting views on that. One, I believe that the states should control it. We have different states around the country who believe differently. So for that reason, I believe that the states should control it. Personally, I think a woman should be able to choose because of it's her body, and she's the one that the problem has happened to. As a personal opinion, I'm adopted, so I'm glad I wasn't terminated. That my mother made the choice to keep me, which is why one of the reasons I'm here talking to you right now. But ultimately, I won't let my personal views get involved. I will vote where the Vermont residents choose me to vote, which is what I will do in many circumstances, because that's what I've been elected for. Thank you.
And thank you, Matt. We have a secondary moderator. I would like to request that he pause because I believe Mark is. Hello, Mark. This is going to be a 2-part question as well. Health freedom. There's been a lot of controversy. Oops, I already read that part. So we're going to go to the second part. Excuse me. Another question related to health freedom. There are both federal and state mandates regarding vaccinations against COVID. Many school mandated shots. There were mandatory distancing and masking mandates, along with restrictions on communities getting together, having private gatherings, including going to church. And the question would be, would you support these mandates should the WHO declared another pandemic? Go ahead, Mark.
Well, if you mean by the WHO, the World Health Organization,
Thank you.
let them declare whatever they want and let us not obey. Okay, there's no global organization that Americans should pay fealty to, not the UN, not any Paris Treaty Accords. We do things cooperatively. We're very cooperative. America has been the best nation in history for uplifting other peoples and other nations. We don't need a large group, actually it's a small group, that wants to govern a large place called the whole planet. We get in trouble when that happens. We work things out and it works better. So any mandate is one we should be very, very skeptical of, even when it comes from a local government. Now, local is the only type that I would be willing to accept in another pandemic. States and feds butt out. The local that might perceive, gee, there's a virus emanating from these vehicles coming in, or these people coming in, or this hospital, they can demand and only they. Do not make it more expanded than this. As far as employers, this is a semi-public area when you're in a large corporation. I'm not a big fan of large corporations. I like small. Small allows a machine shop with 15 people to collectively decide, do we want somebody who is sick coming to work, whether that's sick with COVID or whether it's sick with a cold? We could have schools where there's 15 board of trustees deciding for that school whether the child who's sick should be coming to school or staying home. That might anger a few parents. Let them go to a different school. As most of you know, I'm a fan of no public schooling. I believe in private schooling and vouchers to aid the cost of private schooling. You get education done your way, not the government's way.
Thank you, Mark. Matt, would you like to respond?
I would. As far as the different entities where I would mandate people comply, schools, yes, I would. I would want there to be an alternative for the students that don't that don't want the shots to be able to do remote learning. Churches, no, I don't believe in it. Churches can decide for themselves if they want to have people mingle together or sit on separate sides of the room. Private gatherings, no, I think everybody should be able to do whatever they want privately. If you want to chance getting sick with any disease, then you're taking upon your own risk. Should there be social distancing? No. When the pandemic hit, I didn't believe in any of the wearing masks around. If there was a store that I needed to go to, like Home Depot or a supermarket, and they wanted me to wear a mask, I wore a mask because I was going to their store, and that's what they wanted. But I didn't believe in it whatsoever, and pretty much didn't wear the masks unless directed to. And I didn't get COVID until I got the COVID shot. But I got my shots and my boosters. But there are people that don't qualify medically or don't know what their medical reaction is going to be, and I don't want to inhibit that. Would I keep them away? Probably not. Would I want them in the school room with my vaccinated kid? No. So that is where I draw the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. We have a little extra time because there was only two of you answering the questions. So I'm going to add a question. It's on the bottom of the list. It's about immigration. And the question goes, what do you think of having open borders for everyone, regardless of their possible criminal history? Mark, you're first.
Personalize it. What do people think of having open doors in their homes to anyone who'd like to camp out in your living room, use your bathroom, eat in your kitchen, bring their guests over, smoke in your house, do anything that might be against the house rules, the family structure that you've worked hard to build up? That is what a sanctuary city does. That is what open borders that then send people to cities because they're not welcome in certain places that manage to keep their standards. Personalize this. Don't be like the many legislators, the elected, mostly Democrats, who say, well, they can do this and don't have the same laws for themselves. That's despicable. Chuck Schumer, head of the Democratic majority in the Senate, would never apply that standard to his home on Long Island. By the way, this is not the only thing that Democrat legislators are so hypocritical about. Defund the police. go ahead and riot in the streets. Chuck wouldn't let his grandchild go riot in the streets when he's upset about a Supreme Court ruling. But he'd let other people do it? Do mayhem to buildings, make people in jeopardy of their lives because some people are upset? Well, if they're a favored group of the Democrat Party, that's where it's going. And unfortunately, Bernie Sanders, though not technically a Democrat, he's accepted the nomination of a party that has gone wayward.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Matt, would you like to respond?
Absolutely. I agree 100% with what Mark said. And I disagree with the different classes of people. I couldn't believe that Portland and Minneapolis and a couple other cities allowed that kind of crisis to go on, not only to their streets, but federal buildings. I would have called in the National Guard if it was on my watch and demanded that those people be held accountable. Much like the January 6th riot, where everybody was held accountable and possibly a little too much with that. Nobody was arrested in Minnesota. Nobody was thrown in jail. Federal buildings burned, federal courthouses burned, much of the city burned. Nobody was held accountable. Why is that? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark. Matt, excuse me. Thank you, Matt.
Can I take 30 seconds to
You
answer
certainly
that
can.
question?
We have the time. You certainly can.
The why is that? It's because Democrat officials play to favored groups. Okay. I don't think they personally like these developments, but Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, the leaders of the Democrat Party have interest groups that get them more votes. And sometimes donors who like these groups that get them more donations. And they are sacrificing integrity of a good system that is built up for 200 years, and because of political manipulation are on the verge of destroying it over the next 15 years.
Thank you. Matt, would you like to add a comment or two?
No, other than I'm 100% with Mark on this one.
Okay.
No additional comments needed.
All right.
He's hit the ball out of the park as far as I'm concerned on this question.
So I saved the last question for last. I went out of
Good to
order
do.
because of the added questions, but it's called winning. I would like you to take, it's up to 3 minutes. I'm going to give you 3 minutes because we have the time to say whatever you'd like with regard to what you would do if you won the election, or what things you would like to bring to the audience attention right now. So Mark, you go first, please.
I think attention is worth spending on the wisdom of the Constitution. That even though 240 years old, it's a wise document. Okay, we got rid of the one unwise aspect with the 13th Amendment, and we have the ability to make other amendments to conform. Until then, stick with it. And what that means is so good for Vermont, which is a very self-reliant set of people, a self-reliant state. The Constitution was meant for that. It was not meant for a federal behemoth. That's what we've become over the last 120 years because our avoidance of the Constitution. At first, it was a few in the 1920s, Republicans usually, that put up the, gee, I don't think we should be doing all this that Teddy Roosevelt was proposing and progressive around him. And the Supreme Court held out a little bit longer. But by the 1940s, even the Supreme Court had pretty much established that there was no such thing as Article 1, Section 8, what had limited Congress to only a certain number of prescribed things, 18 of them: build postal roads, fund an army, allow for weights and measures to be determined by Congress. These are the only things, and yet they've expanded so much that we forget what the Constitution is meant to protect. our liberty. And our liberty ends up yielding as government takes more power. I believe Jefferson said this, beware, that's the tendency of society, that government grows and liberty yields. This is a time to take liberty back. We've gotten so wayward, and are we any happier? It doesn't seem like it. Compared to 20 years ago, I think this is a less happy place. Are we more prosperous? Maybe. I mean, but I think technology would take off anyway without government involvement. So letting liberty flourish means respect the Constitution, respect what individuals can do, or at most, concerned states. Vermont, being a small state, might be able to handle some more things on its own. Let's give that a try instead of entrusting everything to DC.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Matt, you're going to have the final word, and you have 3 minutes, and it's about what you would do. Oh, well, I'll read the question. Should you win the election, is there anything you would like to do for both Vermont and the country? But also add whatever comments you'd like to pass on to the audience. So your clock has started. Go for it.
Sounds great. My name is Matt Hill. My website is matthillforsenate.org. MATTHILLFORSENATE.org. And I would love you to look at my website. As far as what I will do, my background is I'm a CPA, I'm a financial planner. I know how money works. Most of the Congress, both the House and Senate, are lawyers. In my national CPA exam, 25% of my exam, or when I took it, was due to law. Now, the United States is the biggest business in the world, and most of the people that are running it have no accounting experience, have no understanding of budgets, have no understanding of money. Or many of them have, other than to spend it and to give it away. Many of the lawyers have no knowledge of how money works. And it's very apparent given that we have $35 trillion of debt, and most of about 40% of that has come in the last 10 years. Now, we've had a couple problems with COVID and things like that, but we've given away far too much money. We've spent far too much money on other countries, given far too much to illegal migrants that enter our country, and we will help to put a stop to that. I understand finance pretty well, and I will also look to challenge the IRS code. One of the big things that I want to do is to tax nonprofits over a certain size. These are companies that are organizations that have paid no money in tax, and that's what I'd like to get rid of. I would also like to have added onto the tax code that student debt can be repaid by IRA money or 401k money. I would like it limited because you don't want people running out of money in retirement. I also bringing in a health actuary that understands how big organizations work with health insurance and pharmacy. That will also help. So thank you very much for allowing me to do this debate or presentation of your platform. And I look forward to the debate tonight with all 5 candidates. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you also, Mark. It was a pleasure moderating this. I'm sure the audience who view this will benefit. If you remember in the beginning, I said that some of these questions were in close alignment with the very questions that Gerald Malloy and Bernie Standards did in their private debate. They didn't invite any of you gentlemen. So again, thank you very much, and this will conclude the debate, and I wish you both good luck on the next one coming up.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.